Director of the Office of Sustainability at Westchester University. And I am not in person this week. I really like to be in person when I can, but I'm working from home today for a couple of important reasons. But still glad to be able to participate virtually through the miracle of Zoom. So thank you to all of you for joining us, whether you are in person in 255A and B Psych Student Union, or whether you, like me, are joining via Zoom. The Office of Sustainability is honored to coordinate this series of presentations in our Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar with our colleagues in the Office for Research and Sponsored Programs and the Sustainability Council's Scholarly and Creative Activities Committee. We have had a full program this semester of fascinating presentations, and we're ending the semester strong with presentations today and tomorrow and the 2 weeks after that. So please, if this is your first research and practice seminar or your 100th, as it is for some of the people there, I know, join us every Wednesday through the end of this semester and then join us again in the fall 2026 semester when we'll have a new program. So, with all of that said, I would like to ask everyone to join me in welcoming Dr. Carlos Morales-Ramírez to the Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm excited to do this. I've known about the Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar for a while, so I'm excited that I can finally have something to present to you guys. Again, my name is Dr. Carlos Morales-Ramírez. I'm an assistant professor of geography in our geography and planning department here at Westchester University. I'm a double alumni of Westchester University. And one of my areas of specialty when it comes to research is in biogeography, which in summary studies the distribution of plants and animals. My focus is more on conservation biogeography of marine species, which is why I'm presenting on the whale shark. So I'll start presenting a little bit of what I did for my PhD research and obviously moving into the ecotourism side, which is where my research is headed now. So this is our lovely, gentle giant. Let me move the zoom here a little bit so I can see my notes. Apologies for that. So the whale shark is a pelagic species. For the most part, it's spending a lot of the time on the upper layers of the ocean. It actually prefers tropical water. So you're going to see in a little bit the distribution range where we can find these. They are highly mobile, so they travel long distances. I have a few maps that are going to show that as well, preferring coastal environments because of the availability of the prey that it actually feeds on. It is a charismatic megafauna, which means that we probably have heard about it. We have seen it in some capacity, perhaps in media. Maybe this could be a little bit too old for some of you, but it was one of the characters in Finding Dory. Unfortunately, our friend here identified as a whale. This is actually a shark. So we're going to talk about the shark. There's also other problems with the movie. It was sharing a tank with a beluga whale. So technically that's impossible because they prefer two different types of environments, but we're not going to go over a lot of that in detail. Instead, we're going to focus on our gentle giants here. Here you see the distribution range of the whale shark. Hopefully the color is not too bright, but like I said, it prefers these tropical waters, anything above the 70 degrees Fahrenheit. You do have some occurrences like you can see here in the Northeast United States. We have found a few there. We have found a few, as if I was actually finding them. Researchers have found a few of them in the coastlines of Japan and even a little bit south, but for the most part, that is the distribution range that it prefers. Here you have a map. Apologies that it's not super clear, but it's showing you the migration pattern. A lot of the species that are found in a lot of the research are being thought to start somewhere in the Pacific, just south of Mexico, and just migrating all through Southeast Asia and into the Indian Ocean. So again, going back to that high mobility that these species have, although we still don't know a lot about their behavior. So there's still a lot of questions on, of course, why they migrate such long distances, although we probably can infer because of the availability of food, of course. Whale sharks are the largest species of cartilaginous fish. There's the little short video. I just wanted to show you how they look like when they are feeding. They feed on plankton, on krill, and small fish. And they are filter feeders. Perhaps you have seen some of these sharks that are just swimming with their mouth open. That's actually what they are doing. Usually you see the basking shark, which has a very distinct frontal area, but the whale shark is also a filter feeder as well. Like I said, we're still finding out about the behavior of the whale shark, but we do know that a lot of the occurrences have been of single species, although there have been some occurrences in which they are in groups. But for the most part, you're going to find them just on their own. I knew the video was going to mess up the slide, so let me do it manually. Just wanted you to see that in case you have not seen it. Along with other sharks, whale sharks are threatened. The IUCN Red List actually lists them as endangered, and they are definitely a lot of reasons why. So many of the sharks in general are accidentally caught in fishing gear. They are actually used or caught for their fins, that famous fin soup that's found all throughout East and Southeast Asia. While I was doing my PhD in Singapore, there was a local restaurant that eventually brought the fin shark soup. You can imagine my deep gasp when I saw that. And of course, I did not eat it. So I did not consume that. And there's also threats to their habitat as well. With climate change, of course, temperatures are rising, which means that although it prefers those tropical temperatures, as it increases, is probably going to continue migrating north and south to find those ideal temperatures. So there's also threats to their environment. Among the many threats, I feel like the one that we see a lot on the media is because of the shark fin trade. So this is actually a short article from 2006, which is a long time ago, but this is still something that is happening. So that is one of the many threats. Just wanted to bring it up there because probably you have heard about this, but that's not the topic of my talk. But this is one of the many reasons why, when it came time to do my research, I was interested in choosing a species like the whale shark, because I wanted to see, okay, based on all of these predictive models that we have, what can we do in certain areas to make sure that we preserve its habitat and also the species itself? So for my research, I did a species distribution model, which is actually going to take the species present data as well with the environmental conditions it prefers. It's going to create a model and it's going to show us suitable areas where we can find the species. The idea with this was to choose a region where other models have predicted that we will not find suitable areas, one of those being Southeast Asia. So it was perfect because I was in Singapore. So of course they liked that research. Also, I wanted to highlight some of those regional issues, as I mentioned, with the shark fins, and half of my presentation today is going to be about the ecotourism, because we do have a lot of ecotourist sites in Southeast Asia as well. So the type of model I did is what we call a correlative species distribution model. There are other types of models out there, but the correlative species distribution model is the one that actually takes that presence data, so where we have seen the species, it takes environmental variables that relate to the behavior and ecology of the species, and I'll share some of those in the next slide. And it actually does that model to see what are those habitats in which we could potentially find the species. So it's all about the suitability of the species. Another cool thing about doing a correlative species distribution model is that the data is easily accessible online. So I got my occurrence points from the IUCN Red Lists Website, unfortunately, I don't know why they no longer have this data. So if you want the occurrence data of the whale shark, I did save it, so I'm happy I still have it. But I don't know why they stopped sharing that type of data. I don't know if it's just for the whale shark or for other species, but I know I tried to get data for other shark species and they did no longer have that data. Very robust data set. I think it had over 13,000 occurrence points. Of course, I had to clean that up, validate some of those points, especially with museum records. So museums tend to provide this information. So yes, there were some whale sharks on land that I had to remove from my model. And for the most part, I focused on the type of data that was validated by marine biologists. So it was not just taking random data from the internet. And then here are some of the environmental variables I use. Again, I consider variables that directly affect the species distribution. So that's why you see things like sea surface temperature, because they are usually in that area, pH, sea air temperature, and salinity, chlorophyll A because of the type of prey that it actually consumes. And because they are sort of coastal creatures, I use bathymetry as well. That's looking at that topography of under the ocean. I also use different climate change scenarios. Now, these are outdated. This is what I did for my PhD. The IPCC actually has new climate change scenarios. They're more robust, but at the time, these were the ones that I choose. I think I left out one or two because I couldn't find environmental variables that match all the other climate change scenarios. So at that time, I used the A1B that's focusing on global population rises and increases in technology advances. A2, which is out of these, the more critical one. So if this were to happen is where you have that collapse between the environments and the human beings. B2 with the social and environmental awareness and technological advances are relatively slow. So those were the three that at that time I could find all the variables for, not the inclusive list. There was definitely, I think, one or two more at that time. But again, these have all changed. And then I ran 4 different models. I ran a model using the current environmental variables just to see what the suitable areas were going to be under those conditions. And then I ran a model for each of those future climate change scenarios. Again, this is in Southeast Asia. I used the Sunda plate as my boundary, although of course these are highly mobile species. But I wanted to give the model somewhere to end and stop, basically, without ruining a lot of the outcome that I was going to get from the model. But definitely a limitation. We definitely know that they are outside this boundary. So here you have the suitable models. Everything in blue is not suitable. And as you go down the ramp of colors here, all the way to the red, it means the red is those areas where there are suitable conditions for the species to live there based on those environmental variables. So again, we're only doing the environmental variables. And you can see, and this is going to come up a little bit, especially with the ecotourism site, areas of high suitability in central Philippines and the Gulf of Thailand as well, which are going to be present throughout a lot of these models. So that is the current suitability. Future suitability for the A1B scenario, we're not seeing a lot of changes there. So still those central islands in the Philippines, still places in the Gulf of Thailand, although now is shrinking a little bit. The A2 scenario, this is the one that I mentioned out of the 3 is the most impactful. That's the collapse between the environment and humans. But again, we still see some of the similar areas. Now you do have some suitability south of the island of Borneo and in other places of Indonesia as well. And then finally, the future suitability for the B1 scenario, very similar, just changing a little bit of those areas where we see high suitability. Okay. Since they were all so similar, I also conducted a change analysis to see where were the areas where, based on these models, we were seeing more changes in the suitability. So here are those models, similar to the previous one. Look for those darker shades of the color. Those are the areas where we see the greatest changes. Not going to go in detail with all of these because then I ran a model using all of them to see if all of these scenarios happen at the same time, or assuming none of these happens, but something much worse happened, where are the areas that we are going to see the highest change when it comes to the suitability. And again, you see those same two areas in the south of the Gulf of Thailand, in those central areas of the Philippines, which are really important, especially as I move now to understanding ecotourism and the potential challenges that this will have for the species. So now, after knowing a little bit about the models, I'm going to move on to the ecotourist sites. We are seeing that ecotourism is growing, especially for these charismatic species, especially megafauna species that are huge, easy to identify. Usually those attract a lot of individuals. Before we get to the ecotourism impacts on sharks, I'm not going to assume that we all know what this is. So I just have a few short definitions and just points on what ecotourism is or should be. So we're going to see more about that. So we see that ecotourism is that responsible travel to natural areas that conserves the environment, sustains the well-being of the local people, and involves interpretation and education. Awesome definition. Let's see how that is being done in practice. It's about uniting conservation communities and sustainability or sustainable travel, basically. And there are a lot of different steps, and these are not necessarily in order, but these are those areas where these places that are saying they're doing ecotourism should focus on. So if you see the first one starting with minimizing the physical, social, behavioral, and psychological impacts on the species, we're talking about on the species themselves, right? Building environmental and cultural awareness and respect, provide positive experiences for both the visitors and the hosts, along many other things. I'm not going to read them to you because you can see them here, but you can see that it's all sounding very positive, right? So why would we even care about studying ecotourism and its impact on species if they are doing everything that they say they do here, right? Rainbows and unicorns. It sounds amazing. Let's all do ecotourism. When it comes to shark ecotourism, this is an industry that is fast growing, specifically for the whale shark, again, with it's appearing more and more in media these days. We're having more and more sites being created. In the Philippines, I think they're up to 4 or 5 that I know of, probably more that we're not aware of. I'll present 2 of those sites and give you a little bit of a rundown of what exactly we have found so far when it comes to understanding the policy behind these eco-tourist sites. But we have them in Mozambique and South Africa. Australia has a few. Even on our side of the world, we have them in Mexico and Belize and a few places in South America as well. So it's definitely a growing industry. So what are the benefits of ecotourism? Let's start with the positives because, of course, you're probably already knowing that I'm going to the negatives eventually. So what are the benefits? Perhaps the most important benefits, not for us because we care about the species, but for the countries that have these sites is, of course, it's a lucrative business. More and more people are probably going to visit your site over just a random site that's going to be doing riding elephants, right? We already know we shouldn't be doing that. But if you are going to these ecotourist sites, you are in theory guaranteed that all of the practices that they are doing are actually there looking out for the animals' well-being. So of course, it's a lucrative business. We have, again, here some numbers, approximately 20 million annually for the Maldives. In the Philippines, this specifically in Donsol, which is one of the case studies that I'm going to present. This coastal town has a sustainable shark tourism program that generates roughly 5 million in revenue. And here you have other examples. There's definitely more, and this is part of the current study that I'm doing, just looking at all of those benefits that they are reporting. So this is more on the business side. We can definitely see that, probably also infer that it has a lot of economic benefits. For the whale shark itself, it does have some benefits, right? It's reducing the fishing pressures that it goes through, especially with now the consumption of the shark fin soup. I keep wanting to say whale shark fin soup, but it's just sharks in general are being targeted for this. It, of course, increases awareness, especially knowing a little bit more about its role in the ecotourism and in the ecosystem and why it is important to preserve this animal. At first glance, it probably does not seem like an animal that's in danger, that it needs our help or something like that. So these programs can help raise some of that awareness. And of course, you can have benefits on local involvement. Although, as we're going to see in some of my case studies so far, we are seeing that this last one on paper is what they are supposed to be doing, but there still needs to be a little more involvement at the local level. So is it bad to swim with whale sharks? Here's where I would stop and ask you to comment on this, but I have a lot more to talk about, so I'll keep going. But just think about that, okay? It's an eco-tourist site. They're saying they're doing all of these things, right? They're looking out for the animals' well-being. It's okay to swim with them. Not at all, or at least not that we know of. Obviously, it would be difficult if you're not there on a daily basis watching what they do, but we do know that it does have some negative impacts on the whale shark, on animals in general. But with the whale shark specifically, it's interesting because these are the impacts that we think it's having, but these ecotourist sites didn't even give us an opportunity to fully study and understand the behavior of the species. So these are some of the things that a lot of the research out there has been concluding based on some of the practices. So of course, human-induced stress responses. So they have been exhibiting stress-related behaviors. When approached specifically by swimmers and vessels, there is definitely extensive literature on the impact of boat vessels on the sharks, and you can see a lot of those injuries. There is definitely impact on feeding. Sorry, my computer did something. Is it still showing?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry. I just saw something going on. I'm like, oh, did I mess up the recording? There's definitely impacts on the feeding. As I mentioned, when you do see a whale shark up in the surface, that's what they're doing. They are feeding. So of course, by us introducing boats and people, it's like, imagine if you're having a family dinner and all of a sudden random people just walk in and start like touching your food or even just walking around you, right? That's probably going to disturb you. So that definitely affects the feeding of the species. And also it affects the seasonality in which the species are found. We do know that based on their location, they are there only for that season to feed. If we are impacting their behavior, what do you think is going to happen? They're probably going to move on, right? They have to keep their migration. So they're probably already missing that opportunity of feeding in this area because now they're moving on to the next area. They're probably not going to wait until you go to finish the family dinner, right? Some other impacts have to do with the biology of the species, especially looking at the size and behavior. A lot of these whale sharks tend to feed more. This is very similar with all of the whale shark species, right? They have that high energy and they need to feed a lot, probably of a lot of large megafauna in general. So again, by us disrupting that environment, it's actually causing a lot of intolerance when it comes to that interaction they have with the humans. And also, of course, we know that this could have eventual potential long-term impacts, especially when it comes to behaviors that we don't fully know about the species, like, for example, the mating and actually racing their young. This is something that's not fully understood. We know that after they feed, they go back down. The few species that have been tracked, they have been tracked to dive back 150 feet approximately. But what happens there, we don't know. So again, now you have a species that was supposed to be feeding and they just went back down. Okay, so there's definitely some long-term impacts there. Unfortunately, the human activity also decreases the plankton levels on the oceans. There's definitely research on this, and this is the type of prey that the whale shark prefers. It is also said that there's more plastic than plankton This would be an interesting research to do to see how the whale shark behaves when it comes to a lot of the pollution that is being found. And let's not forget threats due to the noise, overfishing, and just building directly on these coasts. These are coastal species, so we do know that they stay in these type of environments. So all of those different activities are going to have an impact. Unfortunately, like I said, we did not have enough time to learn more about the behavioral to know the exact damage that we're causing to the species, but we can tell by knowing all of this is definitely having negative implications, especially when it comes to their migration. Oh, I thought this was the video. So the video is coming up, I believe. There is also issues, of course, with touching and feeding the whale sharks. Definitely with feeding, this is a huge problem because, again, these are species that have to be migrating often. So, of course, if you're given free food every day at this location, you're probably just going to keep coming back. I don't know about you, but I would come if it's free food, right? You're probably going to keep coming back here, especially if you do go to other areas, right? If the species is going to other areas where there's not a lot of presence of that food, they're probably more likely to come back to where they are getting those rewards. But touching, my God, here's where my food example comes back into play, because when I started learning about all of this, I immediately thought, imagine again, if I'm just sitting down peacefully eating my meal and someone is just like really all up in your face. And I'm not talking about your mom making sure that you eat everything, because my mom does that and I don't mind. But imagine just a random stranger coming to the cafeteria as you're going to eat something, just like being all up in your space. We also don't know what this type of behavior is causing on the whale shark, because we do know there are some animal species, right, that we shouldn't be touching. I think they do a better job at this in safaris, for example, where they actually tell you what could that entail if you are touching these species. But here, that's a behavior that we are doing without really understanding what the consequences of that are. We also see it, hopefully that video shows. So this is not just an ecotourist video. This is, oh, that's loud, sorry. A professional photographer. We could even say, oh, did not mean to play that again. We could even see it's a research, right? And it brings up this question of, is it acceptable for researchers to do this? If I'm doing this for research purposes, can I go in there and swim with sharks? Is it okay that I just touched it and I was all up in their face, right, as they are trying to eat? So that adds another layer of complexity, not only from these ecotourist sites, but also from the research side. Is it excusable because I'm doing research that I can go and do that? Okay, so that also has impacts that are not measured. Let me move manually because the video messed that up. There we go. And then we do have accounts of some of the feeding, and this, I was trying to look where I got this from. I got this a while ago where I got the direct quote, but this is from someone that actually was in one of these ecotourist sites, specifically in the Philippines, as they saw how the whale shark behaved when they were being fed. The person said, I wish I could say I enjoyed swimming with the ocelot, that's a region in the Philippines, whale shark, but I didn't. I'm saddened by what I saw. The chaos of tourists, and the image is not related to this quote, but I thought it was interesting because that's what this person was probably seeing, right? The chaos of tourists, which would scare away or harm the poor whale shark, stubborn tourists touching the whale shark, the number of tourists should really be controlled. And we're going to see in the two case studies that I will present a little bit more on this and how some of these places are dealing with these issues. But overall, before we get to those case studies, we see that, of course, there are implications on the proper nutrition of the whale shark, missed opportunities for mating and giving birth. As I said, this is definitely one of the areas that we know very little. I think I read somewhere that we have never documented a live birth, So again, we already don't know much about this, but assuming that all of this is happening, it's probably creating negative impacts on that. General health in general, right? Those boat injuries, especially as whale sharks are swimming and they cannot really fully distinction what is actually food versus other things, like for example, those microplastics that could be in the area, which of course then mean that they are probably not fulfilling their role in this see now I'm mixing ecosystem with ecotourism, in this ecosystem. So part of the research that I'm doing now, it's looking at a lot of different sites, ecotourist sites, and I'll present just two of the ones that we have already completed. Specifically in the Philippines, I thought it was appropriate for you to see how I started with the modeling and how the Philippines is that area of high suitability and what is actually happening in those areas. So the first one is Oslo, where we can see that there is a lot of hand feeding happening. Because the whale sharks associate boats with foods, again, not being able to distinguish a lot of that, they show reduced avoidance behavior, which then leads to a lot of those injuries. And on the governance side, there is definitely evidence of harm, local economic reliance on mass tourism, which with very little enforcement of these best practices. I also have a chart comparing the two so that you can see how this looks like. The other areas, the Donsol area, again, all of these places, I have a map coming up that shows you where they are located. All of these places are in that central area that has high suitability. So on Donsol, we actually see that there's non-compliance. While they are not doing the hand feeding that is happening in Oslo, we do see that they are frequently ignoring a lot of the code of conduct, not only the tourists, but also the people managing the sites. There's no real-time monitoring or legal sanctions when it comes to this. And there's definitely more need to include the local livelihoods that are actually in that area that are going to help maximize some of the protections that we need around these sites. So here is that chart that I mentioned, is showing you a little bit of a side-by-side of what those issues are, how they're impacting the whale shark, the root of cause, and some of the outcomes. This is what we are looking at now to start thinking about what could be some of the regulations that could be put in place or some of the sustainability practices that we can implement to help preserve the species and the habitat too, because pollution, marine pollution, is starting to become a big problem too. Here you have that map, so you have Donsol here. This was definitely one of those areas in my models that show a lot of suitability. Oslo is right here. You have two other sites here. There's a few also in the bigger islands as well. Okay. So what can we do? I already scared you enough. You're like, oh my gosh, we're doomed. Poor whale sharks. Or there's definitely things we can do, and a lot of it seems obvious. Don't touch whale sharks. This should go without even being here. You should know this. Animals in general, especially animals in the wild, that's definitely a big one. Maintaining a minimum distance from the sharks. I would say don't swim with them in general, because again, we don't know a lot about their behavior. So although you're going to see that companies like the World Wild Fun. I don't like saying WWE because it reminds me of the wrestling, and I like wrestling. We do see that companies like WWF have come up with some kind of a parameter of how much distance we should keep. We don't know a lot about the whale shark behavior, so even that distance could not be enough. But still maintaining that distance, training on how to swim with sharks, having training programs and train individuals actually lead these programs are important. I would even add we should have scientists on site, but of course, this is probably going to increase the cost of not only maintaining the site, but also how much are we going to charge people to come in, but at least having trained programs that are training the operators and the crews to make sure that they understand what are some of those negative implications. And of course, the image is there for a reason. No single plastic on hand. This is becoming a huge problem. I'm sure you have heard about microplastics in the ocean. A lot of it comes from single-use plastic, like plastic bottles, for example. So this is the image I was telling you about from the World Wildlife Fund, WWF, that shows you some of those practices. So no more than one boat per shark, but we already know that these species, for the most part, are swimming on their own. So even probably one boat is enough to already disturb its feeding pattern, but still that's what they recommend. No feeding, I think that goes without saying. Definitely do not do that. Here they do provide some distance that you should be keeping from the species, but as I've been mentioning throughout this presentation, we still don't know a lot about the behavior of the species. So perhaps even 3 meters on the sides and maybe 4 meters around is not enough to already create some kind of stress or disturbance. The other thing we can do is engage in ethical animal tourism. Here is where humans do not have a lot of involvement or any at all. This means no touching, no feeding. Of course, animals are not caged or held against their will. And here we have a statement that's already 10 years old, but it still has a lot of validity today. As I am doing my current research, looking at all of these different eco-tourist sites and what is being done. A lot of this is still happening, as you saw with my 2 examples. So there's still, of course, the feeding, but if there's no feeding, then you don't have people that are making sure that those regulations or those guidelines are followed. It is going to be a challenge because, of course, we already have seen this map. This species has a large range. A lot of it is very inaccessible, especially in areas where you have deep ocean. The advantage we have is that we do know that these are coastal species. So there are opportunities to engage in sustainable practices on how we actually engage with the species. And there are a few ways that we are looking into when it comes to what can we actually do. And a lot of this seems obvious, but believe it or not, in some of these ecotourist sites, some of this is not happening. So of course, having educational campaigns, we should have that for any place that is in contact with wildlife, right? We're not seeing that in some of these sites. So that's definitely a huge one. That local community involvement is so important, and we still are not seeing it, although on paper they're saying they're doing it. Stronger enforcement of regulations, especially in those areas where we already know this is not happening. Ethical animal tourism, that's the last one that I presented. I think qualified personnel in the area at all times is really, really important. As I said, of course, this is going to have economic impacts. Like I said, it's probably going to bring up the cost of maintaining the site, which then means we're going to have to charge people more. But this is a way in which we can start reducing some of those negative impacts. Of course, less boats, and the other one is just for fun. But I said, don't swim with the whale sharks. Do dolphins instead. They are smarter. They know what they're doing. But that was more for fun. I don't mean that one. But not all is doom and gloom. There are other entities that are doing things to protect not just the whale shark, but a lot of these environments. So this is a map that is showing you some of the proposed areas that entities like the WWF are starting to look at, where we have not only whale sharks, this is not specific to the whale shark, but we have a large concentration of species that we should be paying attention to and making sure that we preserve their environment. So the ones in that orangey, well, the more like brown color, are marine protected areas that have been reported to the World Database of Protected Areas. And we see a lot of them in Southeast Asia. If you remember, that's where we saw a lot of the suitable areas for this species. So see how I tied all of it together? I was not just talking about my PhD for no reason, right? So I was actually happy to see this because I was like, I did this 10 years ago. Maybe they read it. I don't want to take credit, but maybe they did. And we see that a lot of those areas, especially in the central areas of the Philippines, are being suggested as protected areas moving forward. So not all of it is lost. I am happy that there's a lot of growing literature on the whale shark, which I hope people can take and actually apply to other species as well. The advantages that we have with the whale shark is that it is a megafauna. We can see it. We can easily identify it. That does not mean that we should not care about the species that we perhaps do not engage with as often as we do with the whale shark. So I hope that these practices and all of these advancements that are happening actually apply to the whale shark and beyond. I thought it was good to end in that. So with that, thank you so much for your attention. And here are the next talks coming. 40 minutes.
Questions from people on Zoom?
Yes.
So.
And we'll leave that there so that people remember the next talks. Happy to take questions. Yes.
It's when you're talking, it's more of a comment.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of heard like a catch-22 situation where you want to study these animals and you want to know like their breeding habits and their health habits and that sort of thing. But it seems when you're getting close enough to observe them, you're also disturbing their routine, and then you've got that, human element of interference. And it kind of makes it a very difficult situation. And again, like you're saying, they dive 150 feet deep in the ocean. I'm assuming people aren't necessarily going to be chasing them.
Right, yes, yeah.
It's difficult to know what kind of harm you're doing or how to help them and, encourage their existence on the earth.
Oh, absolutely. And that is something that researchers are looking into. And there is recent research on new technology that's actually helping with understanding a little bit more about their diving patterns using more tools on the remote sensing side. So that's not an area that I'm too knowledgeable on, but there's definitely improvements in the technology that's available that's actually using remote sensing techniques to actually help understand some of that. And that way, because we're using things like drone and satellite imagery, is a lot easier to do some of that study without having to be physically with the species. But to your point, yes, we will have to dive with them in order to understand more about their behavior. So yeah, it's like a pro and con. But when you have things like that video I showed, in which we also have people that are supposed to be doing research or doing things to help us understand the species more, have that kind of interaction, it also makes the research feel, like you said, that catch-22, that, okay, we are doing this for good, but we're still disturbing them. But there's definitely technology that's helping with that for sure. It will be a little bit tricky. I recently read a paper, I think it was published this year, that was saying the technology was not strong enough to keep detecting them as they go down to the 150 feet section, but they are definitely looking into improving that as well. So there are technological advances coming. Probably not quick enough, but yeah, you definitely have a little bit of that. I can look it up because it has one of those long names and I can't recall, but it is definitely on the similar to remote sensing techniques. So yeah, I'm sure probably has to do with now I'm blanking on the radio.
The radar works off of sound waves, and sometimes
yes, so the sound waves trickle down and projects back to.
It's like the sound waves that we can't hear that we think are innocuous.
Yeah.
Aren't problematic with these species that we're studying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But no, I don't know the name. Sorry. Should have written it down.
Well, it's very random.
No, and it is important because to your point, yeah, we want to know more about it. We want to understand the impacts, but how do we do that if we're also not diving with them? Yeah. No, important for sure. Are you monitoring the chat or do you want me to?
I think there's a question in the chat, but I'm not sure if the person would like to unmute and ask it or just have it asked in the chat.
My question was just around funding sources and how you've seen things change or not change, especially as you look forward, because this is critical research. And yet, I also know there's real challenges for that. So, love to hear your thoughts.
That's definitely part of where I'm going next. I was focusing more on the suitability, looking at the distribution and all of that. Now with my study, I'm looking on those ecotourism sites. Funding is another area that we're going to be looking into. But right now, we haven't even scratched the surface. We're still looking at all of these different case studies. But of course, that's definitely going to be part of the future of a lot of these ecotourist sites as well. But yes, that's definitely part of what we are doing next.
So what about weighing the costs and benefits of having these ecotourism sites that are preventing the actual killing of whale sharks versus doing it ethically? What other alternatives might there be for the local economy?
Yeah, we're definitely looking into that as well, especially in sites that are more sustainable. The ones in Australia definitely do a good job at following a lot of these guidelines. So now we're going to see how that compares to some of the sites, especially in the Philippines. There's some in Indonesia as well that are not too good following a lot of these regulations, to start thinking about ways that these countries could adapt some of the best practices that we are seeing from Australia, because we also have to think about the local laws as well. That is also something that we are looking into, not just about what should be happening with the ecotourist sites, but also what are the laws that could prevent them from following those things. So it's tricky in that sense, because then you start looking at all of the different countries and what they actually think is ethical or not ethical. On top of that, you need to follow or understand those local laws and how they actually impact, especially if you're talking about, is this ecotourist site a governmental one? Is it an NGO? Like, it definitely adds a layer of complexity when you start thinking about, okay, we already know what's happening. That's where we are right now. We have documented all of this. Now we need to look at things like, where's the money coming from? Who's actually benefiting from this? What is the local government, or what is the local government's involvement in all of this, if there's any? Because Indonesia is definitely looking like there's more of the local government being involved in a lot of these sites. So yeah, definitely more and more complex as we dive even deeper. See what I did there? Dive deeper. As we dive deeper into this research. So it's definitely ongoing. So you may see me up here in the fall giving you a little more of an update, then in the next spring, another update. We're also looking at animal cruelty as well as part of all of this and how this fits this model. So it's definitely big, and we're going to be here for a while. Not today. I don't mean today, but in research. Some of you were like, what? This is going to go up until 1?
I had a question, if I can jump in.
Sure.
A couple of things stick out to me in your presentation. One is going back to that list of characteristics of the definition of ecotourism. They seem very laudable. They seem to be the type of vision we would want to create, of the way human beings who are recreating and are being tourists interact with the natural environment. And obviously, you pointed out that applying that vision to the real world gets complicated, and we're not so good at actually applying those principles. And you came up with a list of some recommendations that I think would get us closer to it. The second thing that really struck me is you rightly focused on a single species and ecotourism related to the whale shark. But of course, there are many other marine species that are sort of the subject of ecotourism, as well as terrestrial and bird watching and other types. Where do you see the opportunities to think about ecotourism in terms of many species and human interactions with those species as a way to get us closer to those really beautiful visions of what ecotourism can be.
Yeah, there's definitely opportunities. Of course, some of them are going to be more specific to the whale shark based on their environment and their behavior, but there are already things that we know about that are applicable or could be applicable to any species. I immediately think about touching the animal, right? Don't we all want to touch a starfish? But then as you get it out of the water, you start thinking about how this is wrong. Maybe we shouldn't be doing that. So there's definitely that applicability that we can get from a single species. I'm also thinking about the way in which we start putting together these educational campaigns. Of course, my focus is on the whale shark. So if I were to put something together, it's going to be specific to the whale shark, but there will definitely be things there that we can extrapolate and actually apply it to other species, at least at the base level, because of course we always have to take into consideration the behavior and the ecology of that species that we are looking to preserve. But there's definitely those high level, and I feel like those were some of my takeaways at the end, those high level takeaways or next actions that we can do that can fit more than just the whale shark. And I think we have a question here. Oh, okay, awesome.
12:50, and we usually
Oh.
pause to see if anybody needs to leave for a class or something like that. So why don't you join me in thanking Dr. Morales-Ramírez again?
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me discuss. But if there are any other questions, and you have a couple more minutes.
Yeah, I'll stick
feel free to
around,
ask
but
any questions.
yep.
I have to say, this the term ecotourism.
Mm-hmm.
Tourism is a business concept. It's a money-making endeavor, you're looking to bring, create jobs, bring revenue into an area, it's a business concept. Eco, on the other hand, is science. And you really need someone who has expertise in both areas where you're going to design something that's going to not hurt what you're looking at.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, like the businesses that are in existence, who works there? Are there sufficient background in science to drive the best practices for the environment and the ecology and the species?
Yeah.
Versus money.
Yes, and you bring up a good point, and it's why in this part of my research, I am collaborating with people outside of geography because I come from that eco side. I don't care about your business. I care about the conservation of the species, right? So that's why in this approach, I made sure that it's very interdisciplinary so that I could get more perspectives and that other side of the analysis that's going to look at things like that, right? To make sure that we still see some kind of marriage of the both, right? Of that eco, sustainability, conservation side, and still looking at the tourism, although like I said, from my perspective, it's to make sure that we come up with those solutions or way to combat some of these issues from a more interdisciplinary way and not just we need to do this because we need to preserve the species. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting part that I'm making sure is present in this part of the research on the ecotourist research for sure.
Hey, Carlos.
Oh,
Carlos,
yes.
one other question. When I was looking at all your slides and stuff, it was really interesting where you did the different scenarios, but came across to me a little bit surprising how in your different scenarios there was not as much change in the distribution as I was thinking there would be. And I almost felt like you felt the same way, but be curious in your thoughts around how to interpret that, because it seems like a really good way of thinking about what could happen, right? Was sort of the idea of those scenarios.
Yeah, I think one of the limitations of the model was definitely selecting a relatively small area. A lot of the times with these species distribution models, you tend to see them more at a global scale. And they're is definitely a need to do it at a more regional scale, but by reducing it to a regional scale, we do run into potential issues related to the data that you're getting from those scenarios. So in this particular case, it could be that we did not have a lot of differentiation with the environmental variables once we looked at it at just that scale. So there's definitely a limitation when it comes to that. And I can tell you, I actually try to run a similar model in the Caribbean because we do know that there's some ecotourism in Mexico and Belize, like I said. And at that level, it was even worse. I was not seeing any change whatsoever. The suitable areas were almost the same in all three scenarios, which led me to think, of course, there's definitely the limitation on how specific I'm being with the area. Now, this was done a while ago. I would hope that the new available data with the new climate change scenarios are probably better. I have not tried that yet. Another part that I am hoping to get to see if there's definitely improvements when it comes to running these models at such a local scale. But that was definitely a limitation of that first part of the species distribution modeling for sure.
Right. Makes a lot of sense, but very cool that you're trying to figure that out.
Yes,
Thanks.
yes. I'm hoping it got better. Let's run them again.
Thank you.
Business model,
You're welcome.
you're often looking, say, a year ahead, maybe a 5-year plan. But when you throw in the word sustainable, maybe people or businesses are looking more at a 10-year or 20-year plan, which means that eco part becomes a more important role in making the business sustainable over the course of time. So it kind of balances itself out, which ties in perfectly to this group.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's just say
Definitely.
business people unfortunately don't always think the long term like that.
Yeah.
A lot of times compensation packages are like, well, if you bring in so much profit this year, you'll get this bonus this year. And to heck with what goes next year, you're not thinking about that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
let's just say you mess things up for future.
Oh yeah, definitely stepping into an interesting line of
But the whole thing is that
research. Yeah.
It's hard to have that sustainability thing because, you know, if someone wants to leave a job after a year, you can't be promising them compensation 5 years down.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yes, yes.
Hard balance to find a lot of industries.
Yes. Yeah.
Just
Do we have
got in the
anything?
clock, so I'll say thank you so much for your time and
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
really interesting. Thank you.
Feel free to reach out via email if we didn't get to your questions, if you have more questions or even suggestions, because this is ongoing research. So happy to get any suggestions that you guys have.
Thank you so much.